Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the start of the final 8 in the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour. Now, after the qualification process, which featured a bunch of rapid games, today we move into the match format with 8 players. Now, there are 4 matches, and as you guys probably noticed yesterday, I thought that I would be playing with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. Ultimately, we had a big surprise as one of the players, Javokhir Sindarov from Uzbekistan, actually made the decision to pick me instead of either Gukesh or Noterbek. So as such, we don't get El Clasico, but I do have a very serious matchup against the young Uzbek junior in this round. Alright, so the format is pretty simple. It is a 2-game classical game match. You play 1 game with white, 1 game with black. Time control is 90 minutes for the entire game with a 30-second increment. So as usual, we're playing Fischer random chess once again, a random assortment of the pieces, but this is one of the first times that I felt this was a very tough position to play because from the get-go, after white opens with the move f4, suddenly there is a very serious target on a7 if you play a random move like h6 and white goes bishop takes a7, already you lose the rook in the corner. So after f4, I play the move knight to b6, stopping bishop takes a7, and now we get the move e4. In this position, I play the move f5 here, opening up the diagonal and hitting the pawn on a2. Here we get knight to b3, I trade on e4, and now this is the first moment where I want to point out one of the big flaws with this format of playing Fischer random chess, which is that a lot of the players come up with the same ideas from the get-go, and this position occurred in no less than 3 games in the event, including my game against Javokhir Sindarov, we had Fabiano against Gukesh, and Alireza Firouzja against Vincent Keimer. So after rook takes e4, Fabiano and I both played the move bishop to d5, Vincent played the move c6, but keep in mind, as there were monitors throughout the playing halt, we could see what our fellow competitors were doing. So I played bishop d5, we got rook e1, and now I played the move queen g8. This is also the position that occurred in the game between Gukesh and Fabiano, and now Sindarov plays the move knight e3. Now, in the game between Fabiano and Gukesh, the game continued with this move bishop f2. I believe it went knight g6, f5, knight f4, knight e3, and e5, and the position was a big mess. Now, ultimately, Fabiano would go on to win, but it was very similar. So after queen g8, Sindarov plays knight e3, and now I go bishop to f7. I could have played the move bishop to c6, keeping the bishop on this diagonal, but after a move like knight to g4 and knight e5, I was a little bit worried about the beat. So instead I go bishop to f7. We get to move bishop to f3. I play c6 here, trying to shut down the threats on the diagonal. And now Sindarov castles. I go bishop c7, attacking the pawn on f4, and the game continues with g3 to guard the pawn, but also opening up the diagonal for the queen and the bishop. Here I decide to castle, and now Sindarov plays the move d4, trying to claim the big white center here, gripping the square on e5, but also if I play a move like g5, f5, and something like h5, white can actually play the move d5, and suddenly both of these diagonals are open for the 2 bishops. So, I do play g5, we get f5, and now I play the move d5, trying to close down this diagonal here. This way, white can never use the bishop on the diagonal, but also the bishop on g1 is very passive. Now we get the move knight g4, and this is where I started to feel that my opponent went wrong. I think Sindarov, since he was playing with the white pieces, assumed that he should have some kind of advantage here, and he tries to go for the most principled continuation with knight g4. Now, it's a very important point, because in regular chess, one of the things that top grandmasters do is we value the 2 Bs, or the bishop pair, as it is colloquially known. So I go h5, we get knight h6, queen h7, takes, and here white has the bishop pair, the 2 Bs. In return, I have a bishop and a knight. That being said, because of the piece placement and the devs, originally having a different placement than what we get in Fischer Random, it has come into my attention that usually the bishop pair is not as effective. And in fact, in Fabiano's game against Gukesh, we saw the same thing, where Gukesh had the 2 Bs, but Fabiano, with a bishop and knight in return, was actually doing completely fine. So Sindarov gets the 2 Bs here, but even though he has the 2 Bs, both of the bishops are very passive. The pawn blocks the scope of the dark square B, and this pawn chain blocks the scope of the light square B. So now we get the move g4 from Sindarov, and here I play the move e6, and now we get pawn to h3. Now, when I played the move e6, this is where Sindarov started thinking for a long time. It's clear that he missed this idea where after pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, he thought he could simply take the pawn on h5, he has the bishop guarding, and he's much better. However, after pawn takes pawn, there's the nasty in-between move, pawn to g4 here, attacking the b. If white takes the pawn, there's queen f4 check, hitting the king and winning the bishop. And after white moves the bishop to e2, now black can take the pawn on h5 and use this very, very passive dark square b on g1, and these knights are jumping into the action very quickly. So Sindarov, after a very long think, plays the move h3, and now I decide to trade the pawns on h4, take this pawn on f5, and at this point, I'm cleanly up a pawn in the position here. I've got the extra pawn on g5, and I'm doing very well. Now, what I think I should have done was somewhere around here. I had the feeling that maybe pawn takes pawn was a little bit incorrect. I thought maybe I should have taken on f5 and played something like knight c4, which actually computer gives as a big edge for black, but I wasn't 100% certain, and being as it's the first game, you want to try and be as solid as possible. So that's why I went for this line where I'm up a pawn here. We got this position after king b1, and now I play the move queen g6. Here, Sindarov trades the queens, and he plays bishop to h5, pinning the knight on g6, and now I decide to trade the rooks and go knight f8. Now, at this point, I was pretty sure the game was going to end in a draw, because even though I have one extra pawn, white has this very active bishop, the knight is jumping, and the rook can come to the 7th rank as well. So already here, I was expecting the game to end in a draw pretty soon. After the move knight c5, I play knight d7, and now we get the move bishop g4. Here I play king b8, and Sindarov makes a terrible mistake with this move knight to e6. Now, in this position, I already was expecting the game to end in a draw after rook to e7, knight takes knight, pawn takes knight c4, bishop to d4, covering this h8 square, which is very important. And after knight d2, king e1, knight e4, white plays something like c3. And already here with these great b's, the bishop on d4 covering h8, bishop on g4, stopping the pawn from going forward, I don't see any way for black to win. Instead, Sindarov gives me a massive gift with this move knight to e6, and now I'm able to play the move rook h8 using this open h-file. Now, I'm not quite sure what Sindarov missed here. Maybe he thought there was a tactic, or there was a way that after knight takes pawn takes that he could win this pawn on f4, but now white is actually in real trouble because I can create the pin on h1 here, and both of these knights are jumping to the center very quickly. So now we get the move rook to f1 from Sindarov, and here I play the move knight c4, an idea to go for the fork of the king and the rook with knight d2. Sindarov plays king c1, and now I play the move knight to f6. Worth pointing out, if white were to take the pawn on f4 after rook h1 here, if white takes knight, it's a classic back rank checkmate. King has no squares available. And if white were to play the move rook to f1 back, now I have knight d2 forking the king and the rook. So Sindarov plays king c1 here, stopping the fork and intending to go rook f4, but now I can play the move knight f6, attacking the light square b. Now, after I play the move knight to f6 here, Sindarov plays the move bishop to e2, and this is where things really start to go wrong. If Sindarov were to play the move bishop f3, computer says that black is better after rook to h4, but after b3 here, let's just say knight d6, bishop f2, rook h8, and white going bishop e1. Now white can activate the bishop to d2. There's all kinds of pressure on the pawn on f4, and once again, the game should end in a draw. So Sindarov plays bishop e2. Now I play the move rook to h1, and here we get the move pawn to b3. Now, at this point, everything is going wrong here. It's very hard for white to survive. Maybe bishop to f3 is the best move here, but after knight to e3, bishop h1, knight takes rook on f1. Let's just say bishop f3, knight g3 here. Black has an extra pawn, and these knights are very active. You'll notice the bishops are very, very passive on the diagonals. So we get b3. Now I play knight to e3. Sindarov takes knight. I trade, take the bishop, and here I have one extra pawn on e3, and at this point, I should win the game. Now, when we reach this position, I was certain that this had to be winning, but Sindarov actually finds a very creative idea here. He plays bishop to e2, knight to e4, and now he goes for the move c4. Now, the reason this is creative is this is not actually what I saw. In the game, the only ideas I saw were ideas like king to d1, and after knight to h5, king e2, knight g3 check, white has to go back, and now black can simply bring the king forward and win the game. And the other idea that I saw here was something like c3, and after knight h5, king c2, and knight to f4, this white king can't get over, and once again, black will win the game. But after bishop e2, I go knight e4, Sindarov plays c4, and now I play this move c5. Now, what you guys will notice about the c5 move is that this move is winning, but there was a much simpler way to win this game, and I kind of saw it during the game, but then I decided to go for the line that I played in this actual game because I missed a simple idea, which Sindarov found. Now, the move that I should have played here was knight to c3, and after bishop to f3 here, I should take the pawn. If white goes king c2, trying to get over to win the pawn on e3, I have knight b4, king c3, and now after the move a5 here, I simply have two extra pawns here. The king can't get over to touch this pawn on e3, and this is a very technically easy win. But after knight to b4, white can play the move king to d1, and now if you play the move c5, very similar to the game, by the way, this is a much easier win, because after takes and d4 here, it is still 4 pawns versus 3, but what you'll notice if these white pawns are blockaded here, they simply cannot move forward. And a sample line here would be something like king to e2, king c7, bishop g4, and after b6, takes, bishop f3, and king c5. Eventually, black is going to win the game. Just to show you guys how, you put the knight on e5, play something like king b4, you go after these pawns on c4 and b3, and the rest is very elementary. The problem is when I play the move c5, even though this line is winning, white is going to get 3 connected pawns, which he can start to push up the board, and it's not so obvious. So we get takes. I go d4, building the chain of pawns, and now Sindarov plays the move king c2. If he were to go b4, I have knight c3, forking the bishop and the pawn here, and after white moves the bishop, I simply take the pawn on b4, and the rest is very basic. So he goes king c2. I take, he plays b4, knight e6, and now he plays move c5. Now, the big issue for me was that in the game, in this position, I thought the knight was getting to f4, and I thought it was GG. But after c5, knight f4, and the surprising move bishop f3, even though black is winning, it's kind of tricky because the pawns are not actually super quick here, and white has 3 pawns on the queen side to push. Now, despite the result, one thing I'm going to say about this is I'm very, very critical of myself for rushing with c5 here, because when you look at the time, I have 19 minutes on the clock. I can spend 5, 10, 15 minutes here looking for the cleanest solution, but when I go c5, I only spend 1 minute, and I think this was a very big practical mistake. So back to the game. We get b4, knight to e6 being played, and now Sindarov plays the move c5. So I go knight f4, we get bishop to f3, and now I play the move king c7. But the issue here is after a4, I have to find the winning line. Sindarov will no longer be under massive time pressure because his idea is simply to push p on the queen side, and that's all he can do. He has to sit and wait, whereas I have to use my time and come up with the winning plan. So here I play knight g6, and this move is actually quite good, but in retrospect, I feel like I should have probably left the knight on f4 and just trusted my instinct with d3 and something like e2, king d2, and a5. Ultimately, I didn't go for this. The reason this is winning, by the way, is after takes, there's knight e6 to win the pawn on c5, and now the knight guards both pawns, and there is a move like knight to b3 check. So, after a4, I play knight g6 instead. My idea here is that I want the knight on e5 to support the pawn thrust versus the knight on f4 where it supports e2 and d3. So I go knight g6. We get bishop e2. I go knight e5. We get bishop to f1. And now I play the move knight g6. Now, this is another really, really bad mistake for me in this position. What I should have done was played this move pawn to a6, and the main reason I should have played this move is that if white ever goes b5, I can play this move pawn to a5 here, keeping these a pawns on the board, which will be very important in a moment, and it's simply a winning position. After bishop to e2 here, for example, I can even play b6, takes, bishop f1, king c5, and now I can go knight d7, followed by knight to b6 here, and this is just going to be really, really straightforward. Instead, I play knight to g6, we get bishop e2, knight e5, bishop f1, and now I play the move king d7. The problem is, of course, as you can tell, now I'm down to the final minute on the clock. I do not have 5 or 10 minutes to think and figure out how exactly to win. Now, of course, I should have played the move a6. Perhaps I was getting a little bit tired at this point as well when I played the move king d7, because now after b5, I simply miscalculated a line. I go king to e6, and after a5, my original intention here was to play king d5, but I simply overlooked that after c6 takes, b6 takes, white can go a6 and run this a pawn up the board, get a queen, and win the game. So I go back to d7, but now after bishop e2, white has gotten the pawns up to this 5th rank, the pawns are going forward, and even though the computer says this is winning, considering the time situation and how badly I know that I've misplayed this, this is going to be a big uphill struggle. So I play king c7, we got bishop f1, and now I play the move knight to g6 here, and this is the point at which I throw away the win. What I should have played here was the move king to d8, bishop e2, king c8, I think after bishop f1, somewhere around here, there's going to be a Zugzwang where I think, what is the win? Let me see. It's bishop, king b8, bishop e2, king c7, bishop f1. I actually don't see why it's winning. At some point, I think the winning line is to play a6 here, but it's, I guess, based upon the placement of the black king. So, already here, I know that I've messed this up. It's not easy to play. I really think that the big mistake, when I look back on this, was simply letting white get the pawn to a5. In any moment, if I play a6, I have no doubt that I would have won this game. So I go knight g6, we get b6, and now I trade the pawns here. I could have played king to b8, but the big issue at this point is now white can simply take, and after king to d3, knight f4, white will sack the bishop here, and in this position, after white goes king to d5, now white will be able to get rid of the lone b pawn on the board. So I take, we get pawn takes, and now I play the move king to b8, after which it's a dead draw. Perhaps what I should have tried to play here was the move king to c8, hoping for a little bit of a miracle, because now if white goes king d3, I believe this is winning. Oh, maybe even this is a draw. I actually thought this endgame was winning. I don't know why. I thought this was a winning endgame, but apparently I'm stupid. Oh, apparently after king b4, this is a draw. If white goes king c5, apparently this is a draw too. It just goes to show how little I understand about endgames, but I thought I had a chance. When I go king to b8, now white can play king d3. I go knight f4, and unfortunately, due to my king placement on b8 here, I never have time to stop white from running the king up the board to exchange the pawns. So I go knight to g3, and now we get the move king to c4, and here I play the move knight f5. We get king b5, knight d6, king c5, and now I have to go back to e4. If, for example, I could randomly put my king on, I'm just setting this up just to illustrate the point. If I could somehow set this up here with the king on c8, this actually would be, oh, I thought I would have a chance to win. Apparently, it's still not winning. But if I could get position like this, just to illustrate the point, where I can put the knight on b8 and blockade the a pawn, then I will win the game. Unfortunately, I can't do that here, as you see, because white always attacks knight, runs back to b5 to play a6, and it's simply a draw. So I make the repetition here. The game ends in a draw. This is obviously an extremely disappointing result from my standpoint. It's a game that I should have won. I think I said this in my post-game interview as well. Probably a couple of years ago, I win this 100 times out of 100, considering the time situation, but I got a little bit sloppy at the wrong moment. I really regret not using my time when I played the c5 move instantly. I think if I had used 5, 6, 7 minutes there and played knight c3, there's no doubt I would have won the game. But that's how it goes. And later on, there were a chance to win as well. But ultimately, I simply couldn't hold my nerve together, and it cost me a chance at winning this game and most likely the match right away. So, not what I was hoping for. The good news, of course, is that it is a 2-game mini-match. Even if this game didn't go the way I wanted, I still didn't lose the game, and tomorrow I will be playing with the white pieces. So you guys will have to wait for the second game of the match. If I win the game, I'm automatically through. If it's a draw, we play tiebreakers. And of course, if I lose, I am relegated to the bottom bracket where I play for places 5th through 8th. At any rate, hope you guys enjoyed this recap. I do want to add one more thing. This recap might have been a little bit quick, but there is going to be some kind of players meeting going on tonight here in Germany regarding FIDE, the World Championship rights, and all this other stuff, naming, etc. So I have to get going to that. So I do apologize if the recap is a little bit brief. So in case you guys are wondering, but that's going to probably provide some fireworks and popcorn as well. But I have to go to that, so the recap's a little bit light, but it is what it is. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first round of the knockout stage of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour being held in Weisenhaus, Germany. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And I'm going to sign off, run over to the meeting, and I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. See you. Bye.